Hey guys, more conversations and chronicles from the couch. So, in my last video, I was touching on a couple of things and I wanted to talk a bit more about growing up in a household where both my parents were, let's say, overindulging in the adult beverage department. So, they were alcoholics, and it was only as I obviously got a bit older that I realized things weren't quite, the way I wished they would be, and that things were sometimes very difficult and very challenging. And example would be like from a very early age, I can remember that I was the responsible one on a school morning when both my parents had literally been up until 2, 3, 4 o'clock, banging and shouting and screaming and clanging and whatever else was happening. It would wake me up invariably, and I'd fall asleep again, but then struggle to wake up to be on time for school. We lived from our school too far for us to walk, so we always needed to get taken to school. Mom and Dad would drive to work and then drop my brother and I off at school on the way to work. And so it wasn't possible to really walk. Now, the problem was that on any given night, which would happen in the week, not just on weekends, they'd overindulge, as I say, go to sleep late and then not wake up. Now, the irony, and this used to drive me absolutely insane. I felt it was so unfair. And looking back, it was absolutely wrong. But our school would punish us if we arrived late. Never mind, hello, we weren't bringing ourselves to school. We were being brought by parents. But if we arrived late, we got punished and we got detention and stuff like that. And so that used to really infuriate me, because I was like, why am I being punished for something that's not my fault? And I can remember on, I don't know how many occasions, my mom and dad just wouldn't wake up because they'd overindulged, and, the elbow bending had been ongoing for far too long. And I can remember getting ready, getting my brother up for school. He's younger than me. And then walking into my parents' bedroom, I don't know how many times, banging pots and pans together, literally banging on metal pots and pans to make enough noise to rouse them and to say to them, hurry up, come on, we're going to be late for school, let's go. And I was all of 12, 13 when I was doing that. And so I used to sometimes feel like the adult in the family, trying to take responsibility and make things work. A lot of the time we would end up just going to bed hungry because the food wasn't ready on time, because my mom would want to sit down and start the elbow exercises, and the food would be going, but it would be getting later and later and later, and by 8:30 you still haven't eaten, the food's still not ready, and well, I was already tired, and I knew that to wake up for school I needed a decent amount of sleep, so I used to just go to bed hungry. And this was the story of my life. And, for a long time, I really resented my parents for their behavior and for their actions and for their choices. And I could never understand why on the planet were they choosing this? Why were they drinking? Why were they not being more responsible? Why were they taking, decisions that was affecting my brother and I, and we had no choice in it? It wasn't like we could control any of this. We were the kids in the equation. So, you're a kid, you don't have a say. You have to mind your P's and your Q's. In our day, we respected our elders and we had to be careful. There were many a day that I wanted to take that bottle and flush it down the sink, literally pour it down the sink, but I was too scared, because I thought, wow, I'm going to get the hiding of my life if I do that. So it was a weird childhood, but having said all of that, it wasn't horrific. I mean, there was every other care and provision and even fun things and nice things. It wasn't like we were fully deprived and just struggling and starving and unclothed and filthy and stuff like that. We lived in a really nice home. We had all the necessary bells and whistles one could desire. We went to a really good school. We were getting a good education. But this, alcohol in the home was really making my life tough and sucking a lot of the joy and enjoyment and innocence of life out of me. So I used to be very angry, and my father and I had a terrible relationship. The alcohol aside, my dad and I just could not see eye to eye. We just clashed personality-wise. And so there was always a very verbal war of words going on with us from very young. I can remember just always, my dad and I barely spoke. And if we did, it was always, shouting, and not even shouting, just insulting and just physical, not physical, verbal rather, bantering back and forth. And it left a lot of scars. And I developed such a hatred for him that I actually wanted to murder him. I'm not even joking. It sounds, talk is cheap, but I honestly, truly wanted to murder him for the many things that he would say, both to me and even indirectly to my mom when they were drunk and he didn't know I was listening. So eventually time went by, and it's, fast forward 20, 30 odd years. One of the things that helped me was that I found the Lord when I was 20. I got saved. I gave my life to Jesus. And even then, I was still so broken and emotionally hurt and scarred from so much that it took the Lord a long time to start cracking through the defenses and the walls that I'd put up, mental, emotional walls, the facade, the masks that I was wearing, the aggro, the bravado, the rude, the crude, the brash. I became quite I think a yucky piece of work, to be honest. And not someone very nice to be around or to talk to or to know, which I really regret now. But the Lord took his time and he worked with me, and he worked in me and through me as I allowed him, as I invited him, as I gave him, free reign. And eventually I realized after quite some while that I needed to forgive. And that was really tough because I didn't want to forgive. I still was full of anger and hate. But again, for the sake of keeping the videos palatable and not 3 hours long, I did work through forgiveness, not so much towards my mom. I didn't think I needed to forgive her much, although I did, but for my dad, definitely. And it was actually only many years after my father had passed away that I could say that I think I'm really now there. I think I've forgiven him. And I started to understand and think about what had led up to him making the choices that he did in his life, and why, in his case, the elbow exercises were a very big part of his coping mechanisms. Now, my mom was the same, but I could never understand why she would want to do this until only literally a few years ago. My mom passed away and left a diary or a journal in her room that I read through. And I was absolutely gobsmacked to realize and to see and to read that she had been molested by her brother's friend when she was 8 years old. And this was the most heartbreaking thing ever, because she'd never said a word to anyone that I'm aware of for her entire life. But she'd been an alcoholic for as long as I could remember. And it was her way of coping with a lot of pain and hurt and stuff that had happened to her that she hadn't had control over, etc. So to just wrap up this video, I haven't touched on much in depth, but I'm going to continue hopefully in future videos to, expand on things a bit more, just to share with anybody out there who's going through stuff, who's struggling and suffering, who has either been on the receiving end of something or has been the giver, the doer, the perpetrator. The point is, we're all human. We all make mistakes. We all have choices to make, and sometimes they're the wrong ones, and, we might live with regret, but there is always hope. We can always say sorry, we can always try again, and we can always ask for help. We can always be there for each other, to reach out to each other. And, having realized that my mom had been through this and suffered for so long silently was such an eye-opener. It was heartbreaking, but it was an eye-opener, and it made me realize that she'd never wanted to be the way she was. She didn't set out to be that way. It just kind of happened as she went through life and as she didn't quite get the support and the help and the love and the care that she needed. But towards the end of her life, she did end up, turning things around, and she was sober for many years before she passed away. And there was a lot of healing and forgiveness between us, just as mother and daughter. It was special towards the end. So what I want to encourage everybody with, and why I'm sharing all of this, and it's kind of personal, but I don't mind, because I know that there's many people out there struggling through all kinds of things, and I'm going to touch more and more on those as I make more and more videos. Hopefully somebody will eventually watch them, and not just my dear old friends who are supporting my Teensy Weensy YouTube channel. So thanks to you guys, you know who you are. But just to encourage you guys and girls and people out there, please stop and think and reach out and talk. Because the one thing that hurt my mom and dad is that they never spoke about what they'd been through themselves as a child. They'd never shared stuff. They'd never expressed the deep-seated things that they were struggling with in their hearts and in their minds. They'd never, ever confided in people. They just bottled it all up and shoved it on down in there. And then they'd anesthetized it with plenty of elbow exercise. And so I know that there's way too many people out there going through way too much stuff. And so this is just me, a little voice in the wilderness saying, hey, you're not alone. And it's okay to be human, and it's okay to say I've made a mistake. And it's okay to get up and try again. Okay, cool. Now we'll catch you in the next one. Keep coming back, because this channel's got to grow. You know what I'm saying? Otherwise, I'm going to feel like a nut job talking to myself and going nowhere. Okay, chat later.